Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Now, the United Nations was created after the Second World War with the objective of creating peace in the world. Now, according to Wikipedia, something like 500 wars / conflicts have taken place in the world since the end of the Second World War. And interestingly, not a single one has taken place in Western Europe. So, should we Muslims be surprised that the UN has failed in Palestine? Let's take a look. So why has the international community failed? Its laws and its institutions. Now, the United Nations was established in 1945 after the Second World War with the objective of creating peace in the world and having the United Nations as the forum in order to resolve disputes before they broke out in conflict. So since the establishment of the United Nations and the Second World War, 500 conflicts have taken place in the world. And interestingly, none of them have been, according to Wikipedia, none of them have taken place in Western Europe. So the world had now entered into a new phase. And why do I say new? Because up until the First World War, there had always been a presence of Islam at the global political level. So the Ottoman Khilafah had existed, and this represented Islam, and this represented Islamic values at the global political level. After the Second World War with the United Nations, Islam was now totally absent. The United Nations represented the Western worldview and Western values. So the three permanent members who were the real force behind the United Nations, Britain, America and France, they shared common values, liberal secular values. And Russia and China, who were also the 5 permanent members, they were also on the winning side of the Second World War. But the real force behind the United Nations was Britain, America and France. Now, although the United Nations was made up of the General Assembly and the Security Council, the General Assembly didn't have any teeth. Even though it included all the members of the United Nations, their judgments were not binding and they were not responsible for the real issues of global peace and disputes between nations. That was the responsibility of the Security Council. They were responsible for global peace, and their judgments are binding on all the other members. However, the Security Council is made up of 15 members, of which these 5 permanent members had a veto power. So if 14 members voted one way and one of the veto powers vetoed that vote, it was cancelled. Democracy didn't apply to the Security Council. Equal votes didn't apply to the Security Council. So the Security Council was in effect above the law. So the United Nations was created for peace. However, since the Second World War, according to Wikipedia, almost 500 conflicts have taken place in the world. In Africa, Asia, Middle East, South America, all over the place, Central America. Interestingly, none of these conflicts have taken place in Western Europe. Now, prior to the United Nations, Europe, if you look at European history, even the 2 world wars were European wars in effect. They were really European wars where the rest of the world was dragged into it. But the 2 world wars were European wars. And prior to 1944, Europe had been a place of constant conflict and constant wars between Britain, France, Germany, and the various other actors in Europe. And the peace that the United Nations promised, it seems that it was only for Western Europe and the Western world, including America. The United Nations has been ineffective in stopping the 500 conflicts that have taken place. And not only that, they have actually been supportive of Western aggression against the Muslims in the Middle East, in Iraq, Afghanistan, and various other places. And even if the Western powers acted outside of international law, we found there was no repercussions. So it seems that the international institutions and international law have worked in favor of the West, but not in favor of anybody else, and not in favor of the Muslims. So is it sensible for any Muslim to look to the United Nations to resolve conflict when it has been an abject failure over so many decades? So what about the failure of the Muslim rulers in Palestine? Again, this should not surprise the Muslims, because the Arab states and the Zionist colony in Palestine actually have a lot in common. Both of them came into being after the destruction of the Uthmani Khilafah, and both of them served an agenda of the European powers. For example, many of the Gulf states, the United Arab Emirates, if you look at Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, all of these countries were almost directly ruled by Britain up until 1971 in many cases. And after that, they appointed people to run these countries who they trusted to run them in a way which was in agreement with their vision for that area. So the legitimacy of the Arab rulers is not from Islam, and the legitimacy is not even from their people. The legitimacy they got for becoming the rulers of these lands was from Britain. And if you look at Jordan, Iraq and Syria, initially the Hashemite family were given these territories to rule over as a reward for rebelling against the Islamic rule in the Middle East. And they were given these artificial states over which they were appointed as kings. And if you look at the flags of many of the Arab states, they are very similar because they are based on the flag of the Arab revolt. Those revolting Arabs that sided with the British to fight against the Islamic rule in the Muslim land. And their flags resemble the original flag of the Arab revolt, a revolt against Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this brings me to the final point, that the solution for Palestine lies with Islam, because Islam alone has a proven track record of creating stability and peace in that region. And for hundreds of years, that was the case. The only two times that was punctured is when the European Crusaders came there and brought bloodshed, and when the Zionist colonizers European Zionist colonizers came there and brought bloodshed. So outside of these two examples, Islam ruled that area with the Sharia, giving rights to the Muslims, Jews, Christians, and whoever else lived there. And it was successful in doing that for hundreds and hundreds of years. The Crusaders failed and the Zionists have failed. So Islam alone, history bears testimony, is the only system that was able to create stability and peace in that region. So the United Nations, international law, and the international institutions have served the West very successfully, and they want to impose their values on the rest of the world. And it's because of that they have created so much instability and chaos in the world. And the only way to bring balance to the world is the Ummatul Wasat, and that is us. And we bring Islam, and Islam alone can be the solution for peace. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.